knowledge, as I said, that's basically in preservation mode. We are not generating knowledge that governs the world. Today's governing structure, today's social sciences, today's medical sciences, none of the knowledge generation actually happens from our prism. So that's clearly the thing that's not working. But now that you seek consistency, you have the other instrument to achieve that consistency: conflict. We believe that everything that happens for a reason. Therefore, the scientific pursuit is organic for us. Science didn't need to be a revolution.
Namaste and welcome to another episode of IKS Changemakers, an Indica podcast. This is your host Shivakumar, serving and nurturing IKS Changemakers at Indica. In this podcast, we bring you people, their thought and their work, which is essentially Dharma in action through Indian knowledge systems. Our IKS Changemaker today is Shri Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavalli, co-founder of Hindupedia, Hindu civilizational thinker and a software professional. Today, we shall explore the subject Inprism and Outprism of the Indic Lens, a perspective passionately and sophisticatedly developed by Shankar Garu in the recent years. Hope you enjoy this exploration of the two faces of the Indic Lens. Namaste, welcome again, Shankar Garu. Shankar, today the topic of today is Inprism and Outprism of the Indic Lens. We're all talking about something called the Indic Lens, that is, how do we use our own concepts to view the rest of the world and ourselves. This discussion has been going on. I think our viewers will be familiar already with several conversations. But Shankar Garu has proposed that this Indic Lens ought to have two critical components. That is the Inprism and the Outprism. How do you define the Indic Lens, the Inprism and the Outprism, Shankar Garu?
Namaskar. Happy to be here. To begin with, maybe a step back, even before we talk of a lens. Basically, how do we look at the world? How do we look at ourselves? What is our understanding of our lived reality? There, probably a 4-level description is where I have started this journey. You can probably do a brief description of that before we get to the lens.
We should do that before beginning the.
So how I see it is that every phenomenon, everything in the world has 4 levels. I mean, of course, nothing of my own. It's all Purusha Sukta. You have the Padavasya Vishwabhutani. So 4 levels of the divine is what it is talking about, or more in a more general way, 4 levels is how the entire universe is. Right? And the description of those 4 levels we will find in the Mandukya, which is the fourfold Brahman, right? The Sthula, Sukshma, Karana and the Turiya. So the fourfold is, in fact, it's kind of, people tend to say Upanishad is a summary of all the Veda and all that. But I have often found that Upanishad actually gives a very detailed explanation of what is summarily mentioned in the Samhita. So this is one example. So the gross, the subtle, the causal and the eternal, or the ever-existent, impersonal,
so
absolute.
Let me repeat this for our viewers. The gross, the subtle,
causal,
the causal
and the eternal. So, and this is how we can see the Purusha also, where the gross is visible, whatever is visible, the 4th manifest layer, and the 3 above are invisible and also immortal is what it says. But essentially, what is cause of the visible is the subtle. And that way, the mapping is very clear. They are talking of the same thing. And how this really applies in our world, uh, there is a mapping. If we see, all that we see as experienced reality is the manifest fourth level, and this is the effect whose cause is the institutional structure. I mean, you can take an organization, you can take the society, you can take the state, any visible aspect of reality. Essentially, it is an institutional structure, which is the subtle or the mechanism or how things work and how you engineer things to work. Your design of the system is the cause of all the lived reality. The outcomes are engineered certain way by the institution. Otherwise, all the human efforts are directed in many ways without conscious effort of individuals. They being disciplined individuals within a system, they operate towards certain outcomes. This is engineered by the institution, which is the how part. Then comes why. Why is it actually happening this way? Is that this institution is designed to fulfill a certain objective, or there is a doctrine. Let's say in case of state, it is an ideal. The doctrine or your principles of the state, to fulfill which principles you have designed that institution. So that is the layer 3, which is even more subtle, subtler than the subtle, which is the causal. Causing that is basically your view of the world. So because man is like this, because the world is like this, because the purpose of human existence is such and such, that your ideal is this. You strive to be truthful because being truthful is the essence of your being. So your worldview is causing the doctrine, doctrine is causing the institution, institution is causing all your lived experience. This fourfold view, if we understand, uh, the worldview becomes all important in a way that although the most invisible, this is the most pervasive and influential part of all that we are, all that we do. All, I mean, not just applicable to us as a society, but the whole of mankind. Most people in any society would be living their worldview in the most invisible ways or the visible ways. Given that the lens with which you look at the world is that worldview, which is the most abstract yet the most concretely visible in our actions, in the way we think, in what we do. So it comes down to that being our lens to the world. So when we talk of an outsider prism or an insider prism, what prism we are, what is the frame through which we are looking at the lived reality is the same. I mean, if you apply Weaver, that's basically the reality is what it is. How we see it is essentially based on the lens we have applied. So that is the reason why we talk of this lens. And in the thought leadership, we did see reversing gaze, all this terminology over decades, people trying to say that, we have been commented upon by the outsiders through their lens. Now we want to reverse the gaze, all these things. But more than thought leadership, I think the bigger context for all this is we never had this kind of prism problem over time, as long as we had a umbrella of political representation. The moment that was gone, there is nobody essentially serving our cause according to us. So our society is not governed according to our worldview, is where this whole problem started. So as abstract as it may be about applying a lens and perspective, it's more concrete a problem about if you don't have a governing structure that is loyal to your principles, then you don't have representation, then you don't have a loyal state serving the aspirations of the society. That's where it all comes down to essentially, which was basically essentially laws of an outprism.
Okay, we'll pause here and take a summary of what you said, and then we'll continue further. So essentially you said that there are 4 levels in which we which finally shapes all our actions. First is the worldview. Second is the why part of it, the doctrines. Third is how the worldview and the doctrines translate themselves to form institutions in the real world, which is somewhat visible, but you still don't experience an institution directly. You experience an institution through the actual actions, which is the fourth level. So the visible part of the daily life and so on and so forth. Now, one important question is, we'll come to see the worldview, the doctrine, the institution are all coming from another language. Somebody may ask that question, that how are alien concepts being universalized to represent what we want as an Indic lens. But we'll come to that question towards the end of it. But we'll go with this structure. And so the critical problem right now that we have is that our institutions are not governed by, are not formed using our worldview and our doctrines. That is the first problem, right? Consequently, the society is operating in two universes: an inherited universe and the new worldview, doctrine, and institutions. And it's, of course, the society is unable to make a distinction between these two. So there is a continuous conflict. So this is the summary of what you said. Now, and you also made another critical point, that the reason why we have a problem today is that the protection that we had for our institutions, which were formed through our doctrines and our worldviews, has gone away. Rather, not just the protection, a set of institutions which actually protected other institutions, and consequently the worldview and the doctrines have gone away or weakened. Yeah, there's no hesitation in saying they have gone away. So now we have to get back in order to form our lenses, but that's a long journey. So we'll come to that. That may be another discussion in itself. Today our discussion is, fine, this 4 levels. Now within this framework, what is an Indic lens, Inprism and Outprism? That's what we are discussing today.
When we talk of this lens, we just saw, how critical a worldview is. As you said, obviously it's a English word, but then we have our words. If you can see, it's not that I'm building a concept from the outside world. It is our concept of the fourfold world, which I'm trying to translate into
Correct.
an English expression. Our term is basically Darshana, your view of the world. Now, in the canonical sense of you having darshanas, can we call this worldview as darshana? We can definitely. It can be multifold. You can have multiple darshanas. You can have a single darshana. Can be, it varies. Again, depends on our frame of knowledge. Let's say, do we have multiple darshanas? A simple problem statement. If we have many darshanas, we already know that the Nyaya Vaisheshika, there are these things, and then Nastika darshanas are there. Then we have a lot of variants. There are Pashupata is there, Trika is there. There are so many darshanas are there. But if there are so many worldviews, how did our seers end up codifying one set of collective institutions according to what worldview, right? So, but this magic is achieved. Obviously, there is a source for it. We have an axiomatic source. That structure of knowledge, if we understand, this becomes very clear how, in spite of having several different views to the world, we can still have or we do have a convergence, and there was never a confusion about whether we have a convergence on them, which will easily, I mean, for any insider, it's very clear where the unity is, where the unification is, where the prism of singularity is. It's not just that the essence of the whole world is ultimately one, there is just one Brahman and all that. There is much more than that. Through a structured knowledge, if we see, again, we will probably take a detour to see how our formal structure itself is. But through that, if we say that we have axiomatic source, any formal knowledge has axiomatic source. This is one of the biggest issues in the last 2 centuries, is that we haven't seen our knowledge as formal knowledge. We have mostly seen it as there are cults, there are religions, they have texts. Now, those texts are believed in by those people, but it's not been seen as a structured, evolving knowledge system. So, once we start applying that prism, a formal system, obviously, every formal knowledge, it will have domains. Each domain has its axiomatic source, which is irreducible as well as verifiable, not proven or disproven. A standard definition of axiom, nothing uh, out of the world about it. But an axiomatic source is essentially in any formal knowledge, which, if the prism we apply is of religious knowledge, it becomes a gospel. It's not negotiable. Through a formal knowledge, there is nothing non negotiable about it. You just see that within that domain, your ability to establish the factual nature of any other statement is dependent on this statement. That is why this becomes an axiom. So it's basically a structured knowledge. There is nothing, no faith element in it. If we start seeing it that way, we can see that this story of creation is there. For instance, Purusha Sukta itself talks about a sequence in which creation happens. Of course, it's a model of the world. Similarly, you have the Nasadiya, you have Ishavasya. There are many ways in which the essence of the world has been described. The way manifestation happened from a single unmanifest to whatever we see in infinite diversity and glory is made possible or has come about. There are so many theories. But there is a unification across all these, in that there are some common elements that are structuring this as knowledge rather than as a set of speculations done by a disparate set of people. Did they come together to codify this? No. Each has his own darshana, each has his own view of the world. But in a structured knowledge, you know that this is the mechanism through which you experience, you state, you codify, and then where you place this as a relevant statement in the entire scheme. So that's where the scheme comes. 18 Mahasthanas are there, or the 32 Vidyas are there, all these structures are there. But essentially, if we see uh, most traditions, two parts we basically need to take cognizance of. One is the sheaths, second is the ecosystem of traditions. In terms of sheaths, we can see we can lay it down as the concentric sheaths. As we go outwards, the knowledge becomes more informal. The more we go inwards, the knowledge gets more formal. So the innermost sheath is the most rigorous formal sheath, where the axiomatic system is there. Around the axiomatic system, you have derived knowledge for each kind of hypothesis you make. So all the darshanas are hypotheses or theories which have been refuted so many times, they have been re-established. There is a full life cycle of how a theory develops in the context of darshanas. But the source of them, the ultimate worldview, which is singular, which is found in the Shruti of any Sampradaya. Each Sampradaya, you can say that it has its own Shruti component, its own axiomatic source, because each Sampradaya itself can be seen as a formal system based on which it is deriving its darshana. Now, Shruti is obviously again one Shruti that most Astika Sampradaya subscribe to. They are not saying that this is my part of Shruti, I don't believe in your Shruti. Shruti is still common, but from what is common, people are able to selectively pick without violating the statements, the rest of the axiomatic portion. So that is how, since there is this substratum of universality, we are able to reduce from all this diversity. By preserving this diversity, we still have a common code which is visible as the Dharma Shastra, and then your codification for state, for society, all this is happening. Again, in society, there is infinite diversity. Each group has its own rules, each Sampradaya has its own rules, each Desha has its own rules. So it's a big matrix of institutions. Each institution is addressing one sphere of human life. None is taking full control of human life. So it's basically each institution is a vehicle rather than a governing entity in its own.
Got it. So let's, before you step further, I think, it will be helpful to have a view of how these things form in prism and out prism.
Uh, in short, if we say in prism is how inside out we see things. As a believer of certain, or as a member of certain sampradaya, or believing in certain, or taking a certain worldview, believing, looking at world through certain ways, how we evaluate ourselves, how we see other groups, how we see other societies, how we see other civilizations, and how we see people who don't believe in our ways of life. That's probably more important because that's the outermost. So, which is why I was actually talking about sheaths, because what is closest to you is very clear. We have a wavelength, we understand each other. Then we see there are neighboring communities, they have their own ways of living. We may not agree with each other, but we have a common civilizational substratum which we don't violate in public spaces. You go to, a road, a temple, a person from another group comes, he will probably follow the same set of practices. He will not do anything that violates your core beliefs. As long as this is there, the ecosystem is homogeneous. When it is not homogeneous, how do you deal with it? What is it that you seek as ultimate goal as laid down by your traditions? That is where the fundamental differences come. And that is where this outprism becomes important. How others are seeing you, how you are seeing your unit from outside in, so that you have a comprehensive perspective of your own ecosystem in a way that you can represent it to the rest of the world, which was missing with the loss of political entity. So, to me, the most important thing to be rebuilt is that outprism which has not been built.
Okay, so let's make it a little more concrete. So let's pick an example of an in-prism that is working very well today and one that is not working well today. Yeah. And then we'll go to the out prism after completing that conversation.
Uh, so in Prism, there is nothing that is actually completely lost in terms of traditions are there, but they are in ICU because there is no living ecosystem of traditions which is synthesizing knowledge. There is no emergence of traditions, there is no emergence of knowledge. So it's basically entered a stagnation mode. Now, this actually we can express into multiple ways, but one thing that happened with the colonial in the colonial phase is that the knowledge function diversified into two, one into preservation, one into popularizing. The popularizing is syncretic, but then they are not having new inputs from the inner sheets. So basically, they keep popularizing what is already there. So, in that sense, in Prism, your ability to sustain knowledge, the inherited tradition is living, but in ICU. Do we have the social structure? It is broken. It is not broken because society is broken. Society is actually vital. It has a vitality, but the governing entity doesn't serve the social institution anymore. So, which is again where can we actually pursue an Inprism or look at the world through our lens, our worldview, without an Outprism representing it to the rest of the world? That question comes there. So, but again, our knowledge, as I said, that's basically in preservation mode. We are not generating knowledge that governs the world. Today's governing structure, today's social sciences, today's medical sciences, none of the knowledge generation actually happens from our prism. So that's clearly the thing that's not working.
So, the way I would like to summarize is, because the institutions have withdrawn themselves from the material world. By material world, I am talking about even politics and governance as material world. Due to which, although an in-prism exists as to how must we look at all aspects of life, how should governance be, the in-prism is not translating itself into the last layer, and building the last layer, what is visible, what the institutions and the visible. So, which is one part of the problem. So, we only have the in-prism in its abstract sense, but we don't have it, in a sense that can operate on the ground. Can we say this? Yeah. Now we will reverse it. The out-prism, that is using our knowledge, to view the rest of the world, is it something that, given the fact that the institutions have withdrawn, we may still not be having sufficient out-prism also, or rather we may not have it at all, because we are using some other lens, thinking that it's our own, to describe the rest of the world as well. Can we say this as well? Or what is more important is to be able to distinguish the elements of the in-prism and the out-prism. How do they how are they two distinct entities? Why should they be distinct entities? Why can't we have, whatever is the core is formulating as a set of concepts, that is a single lens through which we'll have both within and outside. Why do we need this two distinct entities?
So that's actually a continuation of my previous point, was how you look at sorry, the rest of the world and how an outsider sees you, and how do you deal with somebody who doesn't believe in your ways of life, and what is your interface to him according to your worldview. So if your worldview is bipartite, basically your believer, non-believer, all that in out, and your formal knowledge, what is its criteria? It's important to understand formal knowledge, without which this can't be sufficiently explained, which is why it has not been sufficiently explained.
Understood.
Because let's say formal structure or formal system, if you take, it has two primary attributes: completeness and consistency. So what we have done is that consistency is intrinsic or internal. So if we diversify, we have many versions of knowledge. Each version is internally consistent. Each shakha, each Sampradaya, each recension itself for a text, if you take, is internally consistent. It doesn't see consistency with the rest of the world. What we achieve with the big picture of all this is a completeness. Completeness is at the substratum level. Completeness is impossible within a single version at any time. So this is a standard principle, right? Godel, you can either have completeness or consistency, not both. But this magic in our ecosystem is that we have completeness overall, We have consistency in internal consistency in each version. This is the reflection of our ecosystem of traditions where each tradition is infaced or antarmukha. It is bothered about its own knowledge and its own consistency is not sought with the rest of the world. In bipartite worldviews, which we see all the Jerusalemic traditions, religions, their primary preoccupation is consistency, not completeness.
Fair point.
They don't care to explain the essence of the life or world as much as ensuring whatever they have is made consistent across the world.
So there is a universalization component comes from seeking complete consistency at all
All
times
time.
and
So
places.
basically, that affects the way you deal with people who don't agree with you. So you need to force them to agree with you, essentially.
So it's an interesting point. So what you're saying is that the Inprism is required in our engagement with a society that is comfortable with consistency within and completeness overall. And the out prism is required to engage with people who are artificially seeking that universal consistency. I think this looks like the
Between,
fundamental
yeah,
problem statement of the lenses.
for now, yes. But essentially, if you have two disagreeing entities, each of them looks at the other through an out prism. So the outsider looks at you through his own out prism also. I mean, his inside out view is
Yeah.
there.
So which also we are not aware. We are thinking
That we know it.
the outsider is viewing you with a universal lens. That's the other confusion.
That there is nothing universal about a lens, it is about your worldview, is what
Worldviews.
we'll need to
Yeah. So fundamentally,
start
then
appreciating.
the issue with the lens is at the worldview. And because we are not sufficiently invested in understanding how we have evolved through a different worldview, although we are experiencing the conflict, I think that's where the lenses are getting blurred.
So because of this, now there are countless implications. If you have one primal being, what are his attributes? As described in your axiomatic sources, this fourfold is one thing. Then the natural consequence of a unitary source, whether it is single principle or dual or whatever, that's it. But essentially, they are all complementary. So complementarity is a indivisible aspect of your primal cosmic being, which you will see as complementarity of uh, Purusha Prakriti, Shiva Shakti, Ishvara Maya, all the duals at the cosmic level. You will see that as a complementarity between the head and center of the family. You will see complementarity all over in the institutions, in the person, within the human body, between the two nervous systems, and in the cosmic principles, between matter and consciousness. So, complementarity where you have, you'll achieve harmony. If you see the world as two conflicting duals, conflict is built into your worldview, conflict is pervading your life. Your institutions are built for conflict, for conquest, because now you see consistency, that is clear.
Yeah,
To,
seeking consistency is where all conflicts are
but
coming
now
from.
that you seek consistency, you have the other instrument to achieve that consistency, conflict.
Conflict.
So this is how basically these are the implications of your worldview, which is essentially why we'll need to go to the worldview to be able to understand. Doctrine is one level we can understand, okay, he doesn't believe in you, he wants to exterminate you. These are all fine. This is visible.
But it's at the
But
worldview
exactly
level.
why he's doing
Doing
it
that.
is because of this. So this problem, of course, the causation is the other important principle that is built into the cosmic being, where your entire darshana metaphysics, the argumentations, hypothesis is about establishing a causation between what we see and our proposition about the essential nature of the world. This is because the world is like this. This is because the source of the world is like this. That the world has come to be like this. Therefore, human is doing like this. So the causation principle, Arambhavada is there, Vivarta is there, Parinama is there. So all these causation theories are very core to our knowledge system. Although again, at the practitioner level, you don't care much about the causation theory, but the causation affects in every way. The whole Karma Siddhanta is about causation. Your the idea that we make our destiny is about causation. So believing in causation or principle of causation is because it is one of the primal principles of our cosmic being, and then that has come to be pervasive in all our thought. Therefore, we are seekers of knowledge. We believe in causation. We don't believe in gospel preaching. We don't believe in illogical happenings. We believe that everything that happens for a reason. Therefore, the scientific pursuit is organic for us. Science didn't need to be a revolution. So, given this, I mean, there are many such principles we can start listing out, but these principles are all essentially how we have derived them from our worldview. So, once we apply that lens, harmony is natural, scientific temper is natural. You trying to be at peace with yourself and with the rest of the world is natural. There is no anxiety to achieve consistency. But then, does it help you achieve harmony with somebody who doesn't believe in all this? That's where the outprism is critical.
Necessary.
And it was fine also because up to the point where we had a political representation, this difference was very clear. And we did achieve harmony even with people who didn't believe in us.
We applied the outprism to them.
We assimilated them to the extent possible. We laid it on sheaths, right? We didn't allow, we believed in space separation. We honored their space within which they are free to do what they want. We honored our own space. We protected our space where we can preserve our ways of life.
So it's a very interesting thing. So the civilization was anchored on the Inprism and had the capability to create space for others who did not believe in our worldview by applying an outprism, and there was a bounded outprism, and they could sustain over there. So this point is beautifully made by Dr. Balagangadhara in a different way. He says that the moment the constitution equates Abrahamic religions and Indian traditions, he doesn't use the word religion for India, as the same and then treats them the same, conflicts will emerge because you are so in our parlance, I mean, he used a modern terminology, but in our parlance, the moment two completely different worldviews, one limited worldview, one a much more truth-seeking worldview are equated, then you actually create a conflict to the bigger world.
Actually, conflict is enabled with the Enlightenment ideal because it believes in universality. It doesn't believe in space separation. If you don't get your space to live, and if you entitle the other to invade your space, conflict is inbuilt into that worldview. The idea that space needs to be separated, or your right to space, if you have right to life, right to way of life, essentially it's a power play or a power game for capture of public space, no matter how
you sophisticatedly you put it.
Yeah, how we try to cover it up. Essentially it's about capture of public space. If you make it secular, it is essentially invasion into a religious space. So I mean, even in the crude sense of the term. But can there be harmony between these two? uh, that is where the main question is. Now this whole thing, uh, in fact it's a problem of the West more than us, that the left and right, communism and capitalism, these are all conflicting duels in the West. It's not that they are peaceful. Conflict is inbuilt into these poles. They never saw that these two can't live without each other, though that is the reality. You cannot have a capitalist society without a left. You cannot have a communist society without the
Because the other is an
intellectual
extremely
right.
important ingredient for you to thrive
So it
itself
is the
actually.
unique principle in our worldview that we recognize that these two are not conflicting poles, but these are complementary, interdependent duals. So that is the foundation of your attempt to achieve harmony, which is a craving for the whole world. It's not just unique
True.
to our society.
So I think that's a very good point. That brings me to the next question. That is, I think we have very clearly established, you know, how the Inprism and the Outprism are both very crucial, and that and the civilization has to be anchored on the Inprism, on our worldview, and the most important ingredient of our worldview is completeness, consistency within, and completeness across. I mean, you can put it that also reflects in unity in diversity and diversity in unity. Both are an essential ingredients of our worldview. Now we know that these two has to. Now we are living in a universe where even within India, we are living with societies which do not agree with this. Hence, an outprism is required within itself, actually. But we'll take the, like you said, the problem is not experienced only by us, the problem is experienced by all of the world. How do we take this to the world? It's one thing to have, you know, uh, all this for ourselves, but we can't live in isolation. And the best way is to take this lens approach of in prism and out prism, and more than anything else, the conflict between completeness and consistency, and how we have realized harmony. How do we take this to the world?
So primarily the uh, acknowledgement that the other can exist. Once that comes into our knowledge, most of it can be addressed. Because right now, let's say the scientific temper or whatever we're talking about, universalizing of modern science is universal, this, that, it's essentially just another consistency seeking scheme. So once we transform this into a genuine knowledge system, because the current scheme is not holistic, point one, because a lot of unscientific disciplines have emerged in the name of truth seeking. Historiography is there. I don't know what kind of science it is. I don't even know it's teleology because it's an enterprise in hegemony. It's not an enterprise in truth. There is nothing like truth when you talk of past. It's just a narrative. So though you have a lot of theories, one can know each theory replaces and gets replaced by another theory in due course of time. So when this is all ever changing, how can we give a consistent pedagogy to the coming generations in a way that they understand the cumulative civilizational experience? So it's basically, I'm just giving one example. So similarly, your social sciences, they adopt their own worldview without stating it, which is the most unscientific thing to do. It
Yeah,
can
I
be,
think it's a very good point. The point is that one way to force a change in the world is to ask the world to not present any knowledge without actually presenting its worldview. Can we say that? Is that a good beginning?
which is where compartmentalization comes, and that is where consistency seeking civilizations oppose, because ours is universal. Now you are forced to believe it. So that is where this fight is going to be ugly, but it's inevitable at a point that you need to structure your knowledge based on your assumptions. The biggest example that we have seen in the recent centuries is of constitutions. No constitution states its worldview. It just makes a wish of its doctrine, goes about to achieve it. On what basis?
Yes, yes. So it's a fair point. I think that's also a good point for us to end our conversation. And
A
there are
couple of
you
points,
want to
if
continue?
you
Yeah.
because on the out prism, the inevitable nature of or the importance of out prism. In fact, as we have been talking, in prism is present, out prism is what is absent. So to the build that in the knowledge sphere is what we have seen a lot of responses from our side. Let us say the Suktankars or the Sitaram Goyals, all this. They have done a tremendous defensive work in building that out prism to represent a coherent picture of how the world should see us or how we start looking at the world with a certain awareness of ourselves and the world. But there is a long journey, and in the thought leadership at a higher level, we see people like Savarkar who have actually done the most probably articulate statement of how this prism, looking at the entire Indian ecosystem as one entity, ignoring all its internal diversities. I don't think he has anywhere denied the diversity at all. He just abstracted it out to a point where the unified prism has to be built. And today, if there is a journey that is happening in that direction, all due credit to it. But that's again where we need to draw the line. What is the purpose of the out prism? But the purpose of the out prism is to ensure this is presented a unified front. You have a state which is serving loyally the civilization, the nation, the society. You have a uh, exactly why is the skin there? Skin may not be the most important, but it is the most important with respect to the rest of the world. We as a unit in this universe, skin is most important.
Yeah, and that's where the out prism is required.
That's where the out prism
The
is.
heart is where the in prism has to be.
But can this view be adopted to bring in transformations in the tradition, in the society? That's where the limitation of the out prism is. It needs to be clearly understood by the people who are active on both spheres. There may be extraordinary people who are capable of both, but it's seldom there. It's not practical also, because once you take certain course of life, course in life towards certain activity, you pursue it that way. So this has been a big problem in the last century, 20th century especially, where people who have tried to face off the external problem try to interfere with the internal dynamics without developing an in-prism. And that's the major transformation that we need to achieve. First, get a harmony between the in-prism and out-prism.
Very important. I'll give a very crude analogy. It's like the fence trying to suffocate the crop. Rather than it's not eating the crop. It doesn't want to eat the crop, but it doesn't realize that seeking to protect the crop, it's actually suffocating the crop and killing it off. So that's a serious challenge that we've had in the last 200 years, because I have my sympathies on that, because making this fence, that is the out prism, is a very complex job, and it's very painful. It requires dealing with a lot of negativity, but in the process you will absorb that negativity and fail to recognize the crop itself at some point in time. This is the natural dynamic of the out prism, so we need to have some sympathy for it, but we don't have to agree with it. And like you said, if harmony has to be built between the in prism and the out prism, I think the starting point is to invest time in understanding our worldview, and then retracing. I think if we write not write history, but at least if we learn to view our past through the in prism, I think many more things will become very clear.
Agreed. And I mean, it's also in a way that people have worked sincerely, made sacrifices, but then over time it hits its limitation. Honesty without knowledge That's what the itihasa teaches us. You may be very good natured, but without the knowledge of what is right,
You will still go
we
wrong.
will still go wrong. So that time has come for honoring specializations and each other's space on where we are active and where our forte is and where our legitimacy of action is, and we limit ourselves to that rather than generalists. Age of generalists, probably we need to start questioning it within our country, because out of survival instinct everybody has become a generalist.
True.
Now is the
Anchor
time
yourselves
we,
on one
yes,
aspect of the truth.
start pursuing
Be,
it.
be consistent within a universe. After that, you seek completeness across. I think in the process of creating an outprism, we have developed this wrong tendency to seek completeness, a consistency, without appreciating that you are only have to protect universes which are consistent within but not complete. So a little bit of tendency to universalize yourselves will come as a consequence of building the outprism,
Yes.
and that is a risk that the civilization has to invest in to protect itself from.
It has its importance. In fact, once the harmony is achieved, the universalizing tendency of the outprism will be your vehicle to win the world. So it's basically, we are not undermining its importance, we are just trying to put it in perspective so that it doesn't cause any unintended side effects.
Got it. So fundamentally, it's not that we lack the in prism, but we kind of don't have enough champions anchoring the in prism and using that to build a harmony with the out prism. So can we
Uh,
say that?
Frankly, to me, knowledge function has nearly died down. Synthesis of knowledge, having knowledge is not the same as synthesizing knowledge. If we can't synthesize the shastras, the subjects that are required for us to put the future world in perspective, frame the problems as seen by the future world, the common man of the future world in the most relatable way, then the knowledge function is not actually live to
So
me.
correct. So I let me put it in a different way. The out prism makers ought to have some experience of the in prism, and they have to experience the knowledge function dimension of the in prism, and then only go to make the out prism. There is haste in you know um, maybe the initial generations of out prism makers had that, but now we have a generation of out prism makers who have very less appreciation of the in prism.
Probably it's just, if we take the sheath perspective, the outer sheath activism has been so much. It has developed by corroding the inner sheath. The day it starts replenishing the inner sheath, the intellectual
Fair
input
enough.
will start coming
Coming
from the
from
inner
the inner
sheath,
sheath.
which will be useful for the out prism.
Fair. I think we should end on that note, because that's a good note of caution, to all people who are in the activistic universe in Bharat today, that replenish the inner sheath, invest in the inner sheath, know the inner sheath. Your own outer sheath activism will become more meaningful, and you will
And
know where
stronger.
to draw the boundary all by yourselves. You are important, the out prism, but let not the fence suffocate the crop. On this note, Shankar Garu, thank you very much for a very stimulating and intellectual conversation, meaningful conversation as always with you. Every minute spent with you is very useful to me personally, and I'm sure our viewers will agree. Dhanyavad, and we'll look forward to meeting again in another podcast. Thank you all for being with us in this episode of IKS Changemakers, an Indica podcast. This week, we spoke to IKS Changemaker Sri Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavalli on Inprism and Outprism of the Indic Lens, a much needed drishti for our times. In each episode, we shall bring you a new IKS Changemaker whose thought and work are essentially Dharma in action through ideas and concepts in Indian knowledge systems.